In this video, it's going to be the first of two videos on this topic. We're going to consider the question of the meaning of life. So I think it's best to just jump right in, and the way I want to jump into this is with the following famous thought experiment. So here we have Robert Nozick, and this thought experiment, known as the experience machine, comes from his book, The Examined Life. And so let's just read through what this thought experiment is. Okay, so Nozick tells us, imagine a machine that can give you any experience or sequence of experiences you might desire. When connected to this experience machine, you can have the experience of writing a great poem, or bringing about world peace, or loving someone and being loved in return. You can experience the felt pleasures of these things, how they feel from the inside. You can live your fondest dreams from the inside. Would you choose to do this for the rest of your life? If not, why not? Okay, so what are we talking about here? Nozick's having us imagine that we could plug into some sort of machine that could simulate any experiences that you would want. So if you want to simulate the experience of running a marathon and winning, setting world record, you can do that. If you want to simulate the experience of sitting on a beach, sipping pina coladas, watching the waves crash upon the shore, you can do that. If you want to simulate the experience of your favorite celebrity becoming your significant other, you can simulate that. Whatever it is you want, you can simulate. And for our purposes, I would even take it a step further. Suppose that we knew this machine, because you might say, well, okay, I want to live the happiest life possible. Well, I might not know what set of experiences will give me the happiest, most pleasurable life. So let's imagine this machine could scan your brain, and upon scanning your brain, know what set of experiences would make you happiest. All right, so what is the point of the experience machine? Well, Nozick actually uses this concept, he uses this thought experiment as an argument against hedonism. And so let's sort of lay out his argument here. So I'll call this the experience machine argument. P1, if hedonism is true, then the experience machine provides the best possible life. P2, the experience machine does not provide the best possible life, so conclusion, hedonism is not true. So let's think about P1 for a second. If hedonism is true, then the experience machine provides the best possible life. Well, why would that be? Well, we just said that we're imagining the experience machine could produce the most pleasurable life for you. Hedonism says that the most pleasurable life is the best life. Therefore, it seems that the experience machine would give you the best life possible in terms of pleasure. There would be no other way of having a more pleasurable life than that. Now, one thing to consider at this point is that in our previous lesson, if you haven't watched it yet, you can go back and see the previous video on Mill's hedonism and the swine objection. We considered a similar sort of concept, right? So we imagined this man, Porky, who's a man who just spends all his time in the pigsty rolling around and is perfectly satisfied. And we asked ourselves the question, well, is this person living a good life? And of course, Mill says that, well, no, or he would say to that thought experiment, no, because Porky can't enjoy the higher pleasures. Well, so you might first ask yourself, would that sort of response here, could we say to someone who is going to plug into the experience machine, can we say to them, well, you wouldn't be able to enjoy the higher pleasures. You'd be missing out on this whole range of human experiences that makes you different from a mere animal. And the interesting thing is, well, no, that response isn't really going to work. And that's because you can simulate whatever sort of experience you want. So yes, you could simulate just a life of, pure base pleasures of mere sensation, eating, drinking, sleeping, having sex, etc., etc. You could simulate that sort of life. But you can also simulate a life where you study philosophy, where you run a marathon, where you learn how to appreciate beauty, where you learn difficult musical skills, etc., etc., right? You could simulate a life where you pursue the higher pleasures. So because that's the case, Mill's response isn't really going to work here. He can't just say that the person who plugs into the experience machine isn't enjoying the higher pleasures, because in fact they can. So the real question is this, and this is where I invite you to think about this a little further. If you would not plug into the experience machine? What is stopping you? Right? Because let's think about P2. The experience machine does not provide the best possible life. Is that true? Right? So when you think to yourself and you say, okay, would I want to plug into this sort of machine or not? Would I want to live a simulated life that could provide the maximum amount of pleasure for me? What is it that's stopping you? What are you afraid might be lacking in your life if you did plug into that machine? Now, there are a few answers that come up. You might say, well, I wouldn't want to plug in to the machine and just my life be made easy, because then I wouldn't really enjoy the things I accomplish. Well, okay. But remember, we can program whatever set of experiences we want. So, let's go back to the previous example of running a marathon. So let's say running a marathon and winning and setting a world record would produce an extreme amount of pleasure for you and make you very satisfied. Well, you wouldn't want to just win right away, so we can program into the experience machine a situation in which you have to struggle for many years. You try and you fail and you try and you fail, you try and you fail, and then eventually you succeed. And so that's not really an issue. We can, if we need to program in hardship to your life, then we can certainly do that. And another thing to remember here is a lot of times how people react when they say, well, I wouldn't want to plug into this machine when I know I'm in the machine. Remember, the original idea is that you wouldn't know that your experience now would be indistinguishable from the machine. You're not aware you're plugged in. So the way I sometimes put it, which can freak people out, is that you could be in the experience machine right now, for all you know. The main point of this thought experiment, then, is that if pleasure is really all that matters, then it seems like the best choice would be to plug into the experience machine. That would make, if there were such a machine, you should plug in. It would make your life better. Now, what's really interesting for our purposes is that Nozick doesn't think you should plug into the experience machine. And the reason he doesn't think you should plug into the experience machine is precisely because he thinks there's other things besides pleasure that matter. So he brings up a couple of these. So here are the two main things that Nozick thinks you would be missing out on if you plugged into the experience machine. So one is what he calls contact with reality. He says we care more about than just how things feel to us from the inside. Right? So remember when he originally explained the experience machine thought experiment, he said, you can experience whatever you want just from the inside. You wouldn't actually be doing it. Maybe your body, your brain would be in a tank. You'd be plugged into a machine, but from the inside, it would feel the same. But Nozick tells us we care more about than just how things feel to us from the inside. There's more to life than feeling happy. We care about what is actually the case. We want certain situations we value, prize, and think important to actually be so. We want to be importantly connected to reality, not live in a delusion. Right? But the main point here is that, and I think the most important word of this passage is actuality. We want things to actually be the case. It's not enough, he thinks, that you feel like you won the marathon. It's not enough that you feel like you solved a really difficult math problem, or you feel like you finally understood a great work of art. What you truly want is for those things to actually be the case. And once you plug into the experience machine, all the things you engage in, you do, if those are even the right words, all those things you do are just a simulation. You're living a delusion. You're living a lie. So that's the first thing we would miss out on, according to Nozick, this contact with reality. Second thing he brings up is freedom. So he says, it seems too that once on the machine, a person would not make any choices, and certainly would not choose anything freely. One portion of what we want to be actual is our actually and freely choosing, not merely the appearance of that. So, in the experience machine, you would feel like you freely chose to train every day. You would feel like you chose to make the self-sacrifices necessary to set a world record marathon. But as a matter of fact, you wouldn't have freely made those choices, because even the simulated choices you made would just be the result of a computer program. So he thinks, once again, that we'd be missing out on having a sense of freedom, having free autonomous control over our lives. Okay, so there's a couple points to make here, right? A hedonist could push back, right? A hedonist might say, well, no, we don't actually really want contact with reality. Um, People are perfectly fine to put up a false front or to put up a false representation of themselves that makes themselves feel good, that makes others like them. We're perfectly fine with that. Some people spend a lot of time getting lost in virtual reality worlds that aren't real but are easier and have less responsibility than the real world. Um, and in terms of freedom, you can probably all identify certain times in your life when you'd like to give up a little freedom. Think of any of the big choices in your life. Where should I go to college? What should my major be? What career do I want to pursue? Should this person be my significant other? Will they be right for me? All these sort of big life choices you have to make. You might say, man, it would really be nice if sometimes, those choices could be made for me. If there was some reliable way that someone else could really know what would be best for me and just make the choice. Okay, so there's a way that hedonists could push back there. But for our purposes, what I want to ask a further question here. And here's the question I want to ask. So suppose you entered the experience machine. Suppose it provided you with the happiest, most pleasurable life that's possible for you. Suppose you were good. You say, okay, I don't have contact with reality. Fine, I'm going to give up some freedom. But I recognize that being in the experience machine is going to give me the most pleasurable life I could possibly live. So here's another question you could ask. Do you think you would be living a meaningful life? Right, so even if you accept that there would be no way to live a more pleasurable life than the experience machine, do you think a life in which you were simply plugged into a machine and had your whole life simulated for you, would that be meaningful? And as you're thinking about whether that would be a meaningful life, you should ask yourself the question, if you don't think it would be a meaningful life, why is that? Right, what does it mean to live a meaningful life? And what about a meaningful life would be lacking in that sort of scenario? And that's exactly the reason I bring this up, because there is a real question here. Even if Mill and the hedonists are right about what makes our lives go well, about what happiness is, even if they're right that happiness is pleasure enough for meaning? And should we care about having a meaningful life? And these are some I would think of when I think of, okay, what does a good human life look like? Well, you might say you should be a morally good person. Maybe some amount of social connection matters. Maybe having control over your life matters. But there's these two other elements here. A good life should be one where you have some measure of well-being, where you're happy, where you're satisfied with the things you do, where your desires, the things you want, you get to a certain extent, where you feel pleasurable, right, to a certain extent. So well-being matters. But also meaning and purpose. The sort of idea that there's a point to your life, there's a point to your actions, there's some final goal, there's some aim that you're striving for. When you're engaging in activities that you think are pointless, completely meaningless, that there's no need for them even to be done in the first place, this has a significant effect on how you conceive of how you're using your time. It has a significant effect of saying, wow, this is a complete waste of my time. And if your life as a whole is like that, if you don't have a sense that you have meaning or purpose in your life, you can see how that would, of course, undercut your ability to live a good life.